The radio crackled, a familiar sound in our modest farmhouse kitchen. Usually, it brought us news of crop prices, weather reports, or the latest baseball scores. But that evening, in mid-April 1942, it carried something else entirely. Something colder. Something that would carve a permanent scar across my family's life and the lives of 100,000 others. My wife, Haruko, was clearing the supper dishes, rice and a simple stew of vegetables from the farm. My son, Taro, 20 years old and strong like an ox, was wiping down the table. Sakura, my 16-year-old daughter, was hunched over her schoolbooks, humming a tune I didn't recognize. Normalcy. That's what we had. A life built, brick by brick, berry by berry, on this patch of California soil. I sat at the kitchen table, my weathered hands clasped, listening. The announcer's voice was calm, almost detached, reading from a prepared statement. But the words themselves, they hit like stones. "Civilian Exclusion Order No. 27, he said. His voice echoed slightly in our small room. All persons of Japanese ancestry, both alien and non-alien, will be excluded from the entire military area designated as Zone 1, effective April 25, 1942. Haruko froze, a plate suspended in her hand. Taro's rag stopped mid-wipe. Sakura slowly lifted her head, her eyes wide. Zone 1. That was us. Florin, Sacramento County, our home. April 25th. That was less than 2 weeks away. Now you might be thinking, what does that even mean? Excluded? Let me put it simply. It meant we were being told to leave, to pack up our entire lives, to walk away from everything we had built. Not because we had done anything wrong, but because of the shape of our eyes, the color of our skin, the country our parents or grandparents had come from. I was 55 years old then. I had come to America as a young man, an Issei, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a fierce will to work. I'd started as a laborer, picking other men's crops, saving every penny. California's laws wouldn't let me, an immigrant, own land. So when my son Taro was born, an American citizen, I bought this 20 acres in his name. We built this farm together, piece by piece. Planted the first strawberries, nursed them, watched them flourish. We grew tomatoes, cucumbers, peppers. We were good at it. Damn good. This farm wasn't just land. It was my life's work. It was my legacy. It was the future I saw for Taro, taking over the fields, teaching his own children the rhythm of the seasons. It was Sakura, coming home from high school, her mind full of big American dreams. All persons will report to the Sacramento Assembly Center, the radio voice continued. They are permitted to take only such items as can be carried by the individual, consisting of bedding, toilet articles, and a limited amount of clothing. A limited amount of clothing. 2 suitcases, that's what they said. 2 suitcases for a lifetime, for a family of 4. I looked at Haruko. Her face, usually so serene, was pale, her lips pressed tight. Her hands, usually busy, were now clutching the front of her apron. Taro, my strong boy, looked lost. His gaze darted between the radio and me, searching for answers I didn't have. Sakura started to cry, a small, choked sound. She pulled her books closer, as if they could protect her. This wasn't just about packing. This was about abandoning everything. Our strawberries were just coming into bloom, tiny white flowers promising a sweet harvest. The tomatoes were green on the vine. The asparagus had just been cut. Who would tend them? Who would harvest? What would happen to our chickens, our cow, the old tractor I'd worked so hard to buy? The announcer's voice faded into static. A moment of silence hung heavy in our kitchen. Then, the normal programming resumed, a swing band playing a cheerful tune, completely out of sync with the terror that had just settled over us. You know, the war with Japan had been on everyone's mind since Pearl Harbor, 4 months earlier. We'd seen the suspicion in some neighbors' eyes, heard the whispers. We'd lived under a curfew for months, forbidden from leaving our homes after 8 p.m. My bank account had even been frozen for a while, just for being Japanese. But this was different. This wasn't suspicion. This was an order for mass removal. I pushed back from the table. My legs felt heavy. I walked to the kitchen window and looked out. The last light of the setting sun painted the sky in streaks of orange and purple, casting long, familiar shadows across our fields. The rows of young strawberry plants stretched towards the horizon, green and vibrant. This land, this soil, was a part of me. I had poured my sweat, my hopes, my very soul into it. I stepped outside, the cool evening air a sharp contrast to the suffocating heat in the kitchen. I walked slowly between the rows, my boots kicking up a light dust. I reached down, my weathered fingers brushing against a cluster of tiny green berries. Still weeks from ripening. A single tear traced a path on my cheek. How could they do this? How could a government, our government, turn its back on its own citizens, on people who had worked so hard, just like any other American? This was our home, our life, and in less than 2 weeks, it would be gone. Before that night, before the radio static crackled with those impossible words, life on our farm in Florin felt as steady and predictable as the seasons themselves. It was late 1941, the California sun still warm on our skin even as the days shortened, and the air smelled of rich earth and ripening strawberries. That smell, for me, was the smell of home, of a life built with my own 2 hands. I was Kenji Tanaka, then 55 years old, and my 20-acre farm was my universe. My wife, Haruko, was 52. Her hands, like mine, were permanently stained by soil, but also by the flour she kneaded into bread every morning and the vibrant dyes of the kimonos she sometimes mended for our neighbors. Our son, Taro, was 20, strong and quiet, his movements in the fields mirroring my own. He had my lean build, but his eyes held a glimmer of modern American ambition that sometimes made me smile. Sakura, our daughter, was 16, quick with a laugh and eager for her books, dreaming of college in Sacramento while still helping Haruko with the household chores and the strawberry packing. Our farm wasn't just land, it was a testament. When I'd first arrived from Japan as a young man, decades ago, I was just another laborer, bending my back for pennies a day. But I saved. Every single yen, every single dollar. I bought this land eventually, piece by painful piece. The alien land law, that unjust rule that said immigrants like me couldn't own the soil we tilled, meant I couldn't put my name on the deed. So, when Taro was born, American-born, a Nisei, the farm became his. Technically. In my heart, it was ours. It was our family's future, rooted here, in American soil. You see, we weren't just growing food. We were growing a life. Strawberries were our specialty, those plump, ruby-red jewels that demanded constant attention. We had rows and rows of them, stretching out like a crimson carpet, alongside neat lines of asparagus, tomatoes, and string beans. We grew enough to feed ourselves, and more than enough to take to the markets in Sacramento and Stockton. Every harvest was a bounty, a physical representation of our hard work and our belief in this land. Haruko and I would rise before dawn, the air crisp and cool. She'd be in the kitchen, fire crackling in the stove, making rice and miso soup, the comforting aroma filling our small farmhouse. I'd be out in the fields, checking the irrigation, inspecting the plants, greeting the sunrise with a quiet nod. Taro would join me, his youth making light work of tasks that once taxed my strength. Sakura would help get the berries ready for market after school, her laughter echoing between the crates. We were, in our own way, prosperous. Not rich, perhaps, but comfortable. Our income from the harvests was steady. We managed to put a little aside each year, a small fund for Sakura's schooling, a buffer against bad seasons. We replaced tools when they broke, kept the farmhouse sturdy and painted. The money we earned was tangible, a direct exchange for our labor. It bought food, clothes, a future. It felt safe. It felt real. The community in Florin was a vibrant tapestry of families like ours. We were all Issei and Nisei, immigrants and their American-born children, working the land, building lives, navigating the challenges together. On Sundays, after a long week, we'd gather at the Buddhist church, our voices joining in prayer, then share meals, talk about crops and children, and the small triumphs of life. There was a sense of belonging, a quiet understanding among us that we were all in this together, making our way in a new country. I remember one particular afternoon that autumn. The strawberry fields were glowing in the late sun, a final flush of berries before winter. Taro and I were finishing up the last pick, our baskets heavy, our backs aching in a satisfying way. He looked at me, a smudge of dirt on his cheek, and said he was thinking of trying a new variety of strawberry next year, one that ripened a little earlier. He talked about expanding to the 25 acres next door if the owner was willing to sell. I just listened, a quiet pride swelling in my chest. This was it. This was the American dream I had worked for. My son, born on this soil, planning for the future of his farm. Our farm. It felt like an unbreakable chain, linking my past to his future. I had built this for them, for Haruko, for Taro, for Sakura. I had given them roots. Sure, there were whispers on the radio about war in Europe, about tensions in Asia, but those were distant thunderclaps, faraway storms. Here, in our valley, under our California sun, the rhythm of life was strong. We were Americans. This was our home. We paid our taxes. We worked hard. We contributed. We believed in the system. We trusted it. Looking back, I think we understood, deep down, that our security was perhaps more fragile than we allowed ourselves to believe. We had faced prejudice before, the old alien land laws a constant reminder. But we had always persevered. We had always found a way. We had built something real and solid, hadn't we? We thought we were safe. We were so very wrong. That Sunday, December 7th, 1941, started like any other. The sun was already warm on the strawberry fields by the time Haruko brought out our breakfast of rice and miso soup. Taro and I had been out since dawn, checking the irrigation, making sure the new asparagus shoots were coming along. Sakura was still in her high school uniform, ready for the Buddhist church service later. We'd planned to discuss her college applications in Sacramento after the sermon. We were eating, the radio humming softly in the background, just music, some chatter. Then, the music stopped. An urgent voice broke through, cutting through the morning calm like a knife. We interrupt this program for a special bulletin. The Japanese have attacked Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, by air. My spoon clattered onto the table. Haruko gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. Taro, who'd been telling Sakura a joke, went silent, his face paling. We just sat there, listening, as the announcer's voice detailed the attack. Bombs, ships, hundreds dead, a sneak attack, a declaration of war. The world tilted on its axis in that moment. You have to understand, we were loyal, we were Americans. Taro and Sakura, born here, were citizens. I'd built this farm from nothing, made it thrive. We paid our taxes, contributed to our community. We were part of this country. But in that instant, I knew, deep in my bones, that nothing would ever be the same. The headlines, the radio broadcasts over the next few days, They screamed of betrayal, of treachery, not from Japan, not from the Empire, from us. That week, the whispers started. In town, at the feed store, at the market where I sold my strawberries. People who'd smiled at me for years, people I'd done business with, now looked away. Or worse, they stared. A cold, hard gaze that said, You did this. I remember walking past Mr. Henderson's hardware store in Florin. For years he'd waved, asked about the family. This time he was standing outside, talking with another man. Their voices dropped as I approached. Mr. Henderson just looked at me, a flicker of something I couldn't quite place in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or suspicion. He didn't wave. He didn't say a word. It was a small thing, but it stung. It showed me how quickly trust could unravel. Then came the official orders. First, the radios. We were told to surrender any shortwave radios, cameras, and firearms. We had an old radio, a gift from Taro, that could pick up broadcasts from overseas. We brought it to the local sheriff's office, along with my hunting rifle. I knew, even then, this wasn't about security. It was about cutting us off, making us deaf and blind. A few days later, the post office put up a notice. All enemy aliens, that was me, my wife Haruko, were required to register. We were classified as enemy aliens because we were not citizens and could not become naturalized citizens under existing law, even though many of us had lived here for decades, raised families here, built businesses here. Taro and Sakura were citizens, but the shadow fell over them too. Then came the curfew, 8 o'clock at night until 6 in the morning. For a farmer, this was a disaster. We often started work before dawn, and sometimes Taro and I would be out in the fields late, checking the night frost or harvesting delicate crops under the stars. Now, we were trapped. We couldn't go to the Sacramento markets to sell our produce after dark, which often had the best prices. We couldn't visit neighbors for comfort. Our world, which had always been open and free, suddenly felt very small. The cumulative weight of these restrictions was heavy, but the true crushing blow came when I went into Sacramento. I needed cash for seeds, for fertilizer, for the few laborers I hired. I walked into the bank, the same one I'd used for 20 years, the one where my savings lay. The teller, a young man I recognized, wouldn't meet my eye. He told me, his voice barely audible, that my account and the accounts of all Japanese nationals had been frozen. Frozen. All our savings. He mentioned it was an order that had technically been in place for months, from Washington, but now, with the war, it was being strictly enforced. It was real. It was happening to me. I stood there, dumbfounded. My hands, calloused and strong from years of working the soil, felt suddenly empty. This wasn't about aiding any enemy. This was about crippling us. It was about saying, "You are not to be trusted. Your money is not your own." How could I buy seeds? How could I pay the few laborers I hired during peak season? How could I buy gas for the truck to take my produce to market? How could I even put food on the table if this continued? You see, for most people, money is just numbers in a bank. But for us, it was the breath of our farm, the lifeblood of our family. It was the future I'd planned for Taro to expand the farm, for Sakura to go to college. Now it was just gone, locked away. That evening, the Florin Buddhist church was packed, not for a service, but for a meeting. Fear hung in the air, thick as the fog that sometimes rolled in from the delta. People spoke in hushed tones, wondering what would happen next. Some tried to reassure us, saying the government would realize its mistake. Others spoke of leaving, though where to, no one knew. No one had answers. We were all just trying to make sense of a world that was suddenly hostile, where our loyalty was questioned and our very existence felt precarious. I looked at my neighbors, their faces etched with the same worry I felt. We had built this community together. We had shared harvests, celebrated weddings, mourned losses. Now, we shared a terrifying uncertainty. I went home that night, the curfew sirens a mournful wail in the distance, and stood in my strawberry field. I ran my hand over the ripe berries. They still smelled sweet. But the sweetness was fading, replaced by a bitter taste in my mouth. This was just the beginning. I knew it. And that knowledge was a cold, heavy stone in my heart. The curfew felt like a cage around our home, tightening each night. 8 o'clock. The sun hadn't even fully set on our fields, but we had to be inside. We were American citizens, my children and I, but the government said we were different. Enemy aliens, they called my wife and me, Issei. We were the same people who had tilled this land for decades, built this community, paid our taxes. Now, we were a threat. It felt like a disease spreading, invisible but suffocating. I tried to keep our routine. Up before dawn, out in the fields with Taro, working the asparagus, Haruko in the kitchen, making breakfast, then to her sewing, Sakura to her school. But the rhythm was broken. The old radio, the one I'd surrendered weeks ago, sat silent and empty where it used to crackle with news and music. The neighbors, once friendly, now averted their eyes. The world was changing, and we were shrinking. Then, one afternoon in early May, Taro came home from town, his face pale and drawn. He didn't say a word, just handed me a notice he'd torn from a telephone pole in Florin. It was a stark, black and white poster, an official government bulletin. My hands trembled as I took it. It was titled, "Instructions to all persons of Japanese ancestry." I read it aloud, my voice cracking with each word. It designated our specific civilian exclusion area, the one covering Florin and the surrounding farms, for evacuation. All persons of Japanese ancestry, citizen or not, were required to report to a civil control station. We were to be prepared for removal to an assembly center. We had less than 2 weeks, May 13th, less than 2 weeks, to leave our home, our farm, our entire life. Haruko stood beside me, her hands pressed over her mouth, a silent gasp. Sakura, who had been studying at the kitchen table, dropped her book. Taro, usually so steady, leaned against the doorframe, his shoulders slumped. The words on the paper were cold, bureaucratic, but they felt like a physical blow. "What about the farm?" Haruko whispered, her voice barely audible. That was the question, wasn't it? The farm. 20 acres of strawberries, asparagus, tomatoes, and string beans. My life's work. Taro's inheritance. The dream I'd built from nothing, piece by piece, row by row. It was legally Taro's, purchased in his name years ago because men like me, an Issei, couldn't own land in America. But it was my land, our land. The order was chillingly clear. We could only take such items as can be carried by the individual or family. 2 suitcases. That was it. What did that mean for our farm equipment? Our tractor? The irrigation system? The farmhouse itself, which I'd built with my own hands? "We have to sell it," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Everything. The next few days were a blur of frantic, desperate activity. Taro and I drove into Sacramento, then Stockton, trying to talk to anyone we knew, any produce buyer, any land agent. We explained our situation, our deadline. The response was always the same. Polite nods, sympathetic looks, but no real help. "It's a tough time, Kenji," a longtime buyer told me, avoiding my gaze. "People are nervous about buying from, you know." He didn't need to finish the sentence. "From us. From the Japanese." My bank account was still frozen, a cruel joke. I couldn't even access the little money we had saved, let alone try to move it. So we had to sell everything for cash. And fast. The word spread like wildfire through the valley. The Tanaka family, like so many others, was being evacuated, and that meant opportunity for others. They started showing up at our gate. Men in dusty pickup trucks, wearing cheap suits, their eyes sharp and calculating. They weren't farmers, not real ones. They were scavengers, circling. "Heard you folks are heading out," one man said, chewing on a toothpick, his gaze sweeping over our fields, then our tractor. "Tough break. Tell you what, I'll take that tractor off your hands. $500. $500. My tractor. A sturdy Fordson that had cost me over $1,000 just 5 years ago, meticulously maintained, running like new. It was worth at least double that. But he knew. He knew we had no choice. I felt a surge of cold anger, a feeling I rarely allowed myself. I wanted to tell him to get off my land, to tell him where he could put his $500. But I couldn't. This was not a negotiation. This was a forced surrender. "It's worth more," Taro said, his voice tight with suppressed fury. The man just shrugged. "That's my offer. Got plenty of other farms to look at before the deadline." He flashed a predatory smile. "You folks ain't got much time, do you?" He was right. We didn't. This wasn't just about losing money, it was about losing time. Every day we spent trying to get a fair price was a day lost in preparing for the unknown. We tried to sell our household goods, Haruko's sewing machine, the sturdy oak dining table where we'd shared so many meals, Sakura's piano. They were met with similar, contemptuous offers. "Who wants second-hand Japanese furniture now?" a woman sniffed, eyeing Haruko's delicate porcelain tea set. It wasn't just the money. It was the insult, the casual dismissal of everything we had built, everything we valued. It was as if our very existence, our history, was being erased, deemed worthless. I even went to Mr. Johnson, my white neighbor, a man I'd traded seeds and shared stories with for years. He met me at his fence line, his face etched with sorrow. "Kenji," he said, his voice low, "I wish I could help, truly. But it's the government. Everyone's too scared to go against them, and the banks, they won't touch anything until this blows over." He couldn't help. Not because he wouldn't, but because he couldn't. It wasn't just the prejudiced buyers. It was the entire system. The government had created a situation where our property was worthless to us and only valuable to those willing to exploit our desperation. It was a perfectly orchestrated economic collapse, targeted specifically at us. We had poured our lives into this soil. Every sunrise, every back-breaking harvest, every penny saved. We had dreams of expanding, of buying the 25 acres next door, of seeing Taro take over, of Sakura going to college in Sacramento. Now, those dreams were rotting on the vine, just like the strawberries we wouldn't be able to harvest. The posters were everywhere now. A constant reminder of our impending doom. The deadline, May 13th, loomed larger with each passing hour. We were forced to choose between selling a lifetime of work for pennies or simply abandoning it. And no matter what we chose, we would lose everything. The anger burned in my gut, hot and bitter. But beneath it, a cold, hard fear began to set in. What would become of us? What would become of my family? The man across the table from me was named Mr. Henderson. He had a tight, thin smile and eyes that never quite met mine. He was a land broker, I'd been told, an expert in distressed sales. I sat in my own kitchen, the heart of our home, and watched him pick at a loose thread on his tweed jacket. He held the deed to my farm in his hand. The deed, of course, was in Taro's name. Taro sat beside me, his jaw clenched. His eyes fixed on some point beyond the window. Henderson had offered us $5,000 for 20 acres. 20 acres of prime farmland, meticulously cultivated for decades, with a farmhouse I'd built with my own hands, irrigation systems, sheds, and a Fordson tractor that alone cost around $600 new. $5,000. It was an insult, a robbery. Before the war, this land, this farm, would have easily fetched $50,000, maybe $60,000. That extra 25 acres I'd planned to buy, that would have been another $50,000. Henderson knew it. He just didn't care. He spoke about market conditions, about the unfortunate circumstances. He spoke as if this wasn't happening to us, but around us, a natural disaster he was merely navigating. He told me that if we didn't take his offer, someone else would. And soon, he added, because the deadline was firm. Evacuation day was just 4 days away. 4 days to sell a lifetime's work. Haruko stood in the doorway, her hands clasped, her face pale. She didn't say a word, but her presence was a silent plea, a testament to the years of labor, the countless strawberries picked, the asparagus bundles tied, the tomatoes canned. This was her life too. Sakura was upstairs, I imagined, trying to choose what small treasures could fit into a single suitcase. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for the pen. I knew it was futile to argue. There were no other buyers. The few who had come by had offered even less, or simply eyed our desperation like vultures. Mr. Johnson, our trusted friend, had looked away when I'd asked him to consider buying it, telling me he simply couldn't. Not with the way things were, not with the pressure he'd face. So I signed. Taro signed. Each stroke of the pen felt like a betrayal, a surrender. Henderson's thin smile widened fractionally. He pushed a stack of bills across the table, $5,000 in crisp new hundreds. It felt heavy, and yet utterly worthless. This was not the price of my farm. This was the price of our eviction. Later that afternoon, after Henderson had driven off in a cloud of dust, the silence in the farmhouse was deafening. The money lay on the kitchen table, a stark reminder of our defeat. Haruko began packing, moving with a quiet, efficient despair. We were allowed 2 suitcases per person. 2 suitcases. My entire life, our entire life, condensed to 8 small boxes of memories and essentials. I watched Haruko carefully fold a faded kimono, a wedding gift from her mother. She paused, running her fingers over the silk, then gently placed it back in the chest. Too bulky. She chose a simpler, worn one. Sakura brought down a small wooden box filled with pressed flowers and tiny notes. Her high school yearbook, a few precious books. Taro argued for his baseball glove, then conceded it was too much space. The hunting rifle, my father's, was already gone, surrendered weeks ago. The old shortwave radio, too. I walked out to the fields. The sun was beginning its slow descent, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, just as it had every evening for the past 30 years. The strawberry plants were heavy with ripe fruit, their leaves glistening. The asparagus spears stood tall, ready for harvest. The tomato vines were thick, bursting with green promises. This was a good year. A beautiful year. I knelt, digging my fingers into the rich, dark soil. It crumbled between my fingers, warm and alive. I could almost feel the pulse of the land, the years of sweat, the dreams buried here. I remembered the day Taro was born, how I'd looked at this land, so barren then, and sworn I would make it fruitful for him, for our future. I'd seen his name on the deed, not just as a legal workaround, but as a promise. Now, that promise was shattered. I walked the perimeter of the 20 acres, a silent farewell to every row, every plant, every memory. I touched the bark of the old oak tree where Haruko and I used to sit on hot summer evenings. I ran my hand along the weathered wood of the barn, remembering the day Taro had helped me mend a loose board, his small hands clumsy but eager. This wasn't just land. It was every moment of our lives, every sacrifice, every hope. It was our identity. And now it was gone. The next morning, May 9th, 1942, the air was thick with a strange mixture of dust and resignation. Florin, our quiet, bustling community, was a ghost town in the making. Our farmhouse stood empty, stripped bare. The curtains were down, the furniture pushed against the walls, covered with old sheets. Only the echoes of our laughter remained. A bus, dull green and utilitarian, pulled up the dirt road, military police standing guard, their rifles glinting in the morning sun. Other buses were doing the same all over Florin, I knew. Our neighbors, their faces etched with the same profound grief, gathered their meager belongings, their children clinging to their legs. I hoisted my suitcase, then Haruko's. Taro carried his own. His shoulders slumped. Sakura, her eyes wide and red-rimmed, clutched a small cloth doll. We walked to the bus, one step after another, leaving behind not just a farm, but a lifetime. The other families were already boarding, their faces reflecting our own emptiness. As I stepped onto the bus, I glanced back at our house, at the fields. The sun was higher now, illuminating the ripe strawberries, untouched, unpicked. The fields would go to waste. Henderson would take possession and likely let everything rot before he brought in a new crew. That was the real cost, I thought, as the bus door hissed shut. Not just our money, but the waste. The destruction of something so vital. The bus lurched forward, slowly, deliberately. I pressed my face against the window, watching Florin shrink into the distance. The familiar landmarks. The small shops, the Buddhist temple, the school where Sakura had dreamed of going to college in Sacramento. They all faded away. We were leaving everything. Our home, our legacy, our future. We were leaving the only life we had ever known in America, dragged into an unknown future simply because of the faces we wore. And the bitter truth? No one seemed to care. The bus ride from Florin felt endless. Every mile took us further from the strawberry fields, from the soil that was our lifeblood. We drove through the dust-choked Central Valley, then north, past familiar landmarks that blurred into a desolate, unfamiliar landscape. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we arrived. Tule Lake. It wasn't a town. It was a collection of identical tar paper barracks, stretching out in rows under a vast, indifferent sky. The air was thick with dust, gritty against my teeth. A barbed wire fence, tall and stark, ringed the entire settlement, watched over by guard towers. This was our new home. A prison, no matter what they called it. My first sight of our barrack, Block 17, Unit C, was a punch to the gut. It was a single room, maybe 20 by 20 feet, bare except for 4 army cots and a pot-bellied stove. No kitchen, no bathroom, no privacy. Just 4 walls and a door that didn't even latch properly. Our farmhouse, which I had built with my own hands, had seemed modest. Now it felt like a palace from a forgotten dream. Haruko just stood there, clutching her single suitcase, her face pale. She didn't speak. Sakura, my spirited daughter, looked around with wide, frightened eyes, then slowly slumped onto one of the cots. Taro, my son, tried to be strong. He scanned the room, then the dusty landscape outside the single window, as if searching for something to fix. But there was nothing to fix here. Nothing we could control. The first few weeks were a blur of disorientation. Meals were served in a communal mess hall, the food bland and unfamiliar. The constant noise, the lack of quiet corners, the feeling of being watched. It wore on us. We were a family of farmers, used to the rhythm of the land, the solitude of the fields. Here, we were just bodies in a crowd. You might wonder how you endure something like that, how you don't just break. Here's the thing. You don't have a choice. You adapt. You find purpose, however small, however fleeting. It's what people do. It's what we had to do. Taro, always the most practical, was the first to find his footing. Within days, he'd volunteered for a job in the mess hall. He wasn't handling strawberries or asparagus anymore. He was peeling potatoes, washing dishes, pushing carts of food through the dust. The pay was a paltry $16 a month. It was real US currency, of course, but in the camp's closed economy, with so few goods to buy, it felt like its own, limited kind of money. It was barely enough to buy a few extra necessities from the camp store, a toothbrush, a bar of soap, but it gave him something to do, a reason to get up each morning. I saw the quiet pride in his eyes when he returned, tired but purposeful. He was still providing, even in this wasteland. Haruko, my Haruko, found her purpose in nurturing. Many of the children, especially the younger ones, were lost. They missed their schools, their routines. So Haruko, along with other mothers, started a makeshift school in one of the empty barracks. She taught them arithmetic on a borrowed chalkboard, told them stories, sang songs. Her hands, once stained with the rich soil of Florin, were now holding chalk, guiding small, eager fingers. She couldn't grow food for them, but she could grow their minds, their spirits. Sakura, after the initial shock, slowly began to find her own way. She joined a group of girls who started a camp newspaper, writing stories about daily life, about the small victories and frustrations. She even helped organize a small baseball league, which brought a burst of laughter and competition to the otherwise monotonous days. It wasn't the college she dreamed of, but it was a path to something, a way to be herself, even here. And me? I watched them, my family, my pride. Seeing them find their strength, their small moments of agency, stirred something in me too. I needed to feel the earth in my hands again. I needed to grow. The campground was mostly hard-packed dirt and sagebrush, but behind our barrack, near the fence, there was a small patch of less trodden earth. I started to clear it. Day after day, I would go out, turning the stubborn soil, picking out rocks, working the ground until my hands were calloused and aching, just like they used to be. Other men, seeing me, started to do the same. Soon, a small network of tiny, individual gardens began to appear. I planted what I could get. A few seeds smuggled in, some scraps from the mess hall, a few tomato plants, some radishes, even some wildflowers. It wasn't much. It couldn't feed us. But seeing the first green shoots emerge from that barren earth, it was like a prayer answered. It was a small act of defiance, a way to say, you can take our land, you can take our freedom, but you cannot take our connection to the earth. It was a quiet reclamation of dignity. Our old life, our economic life, was gone. Completely. We were no longer farmers, owners of a thriving business. We were dependents, living on government rations, earning a pittance for camp labor. The hustle of the markets in Sacramento and Stockton, the negotiations over prices, the pride of a bountiful harvest, all of it replaced by the controlled, artificial economy of the camp. It was a complete stripping away of financial agency, a lesson in how quickly everything you build can be taken. But even in the camps, the human spirit, especially the Japanese-American spirit, found ways to thrive. We celebrated our festivals. We had our sumo matches, our cultural performances, our storytelling. We found humor in the absurdity, comfort in our shared language, and strength in our community. We were all in the same boat, and that shared hardship forged bonds stronger than any fence. Looking back, those years in Tule Lake were a slow, agonizing lesson in resilience. We lost everything material, yes, but we gained an understanding of something deeper, that a family, a community can endure. That hope, like a stubborn radish seed, can sprout even in the harshest ground. It was a quiet, determined survival, awaiting, because deep down, I still believed, I had to believe, that one day this would end. And when it did, we would rebuild. We always did. Section 7-8, The Scars Remain. The gates of Tule Lake finally opened in early 1946. It wasn't a sudden grand liberation, but a slow trickle. The war had ended months before, in Europe and the Pacific. But for us, the end of the war felt like a new beginning of uncertainty. We packed our meager belongings back into the same 2 suitcases we'd carried in. 4 long years had passed. 4 years of barbed wire and dust, of communal latrines and shared meals, of lives lived in limbo. We left behind the small garden Kenji had painstakingly coaxed from the stubborn soil behind our barrack, the baseball diamond Sakura had helped organize, the mess hall where Taro had worked for $12 a month, the makeshift school where Haruko had taught. We left behind a place that had been both a prison and, against all odds, a community. The journey back to Florin was heavy with a silence that wasn't peaceful. It was the quiet of apprehension, of unspoken fear for what we would find. What was waiting for us? What would become of us? We had almost nothing. The few $100s from the forced sale of our farm, the pitiful camp wages. It was a fraction of what we'd once owned. When the bus finally pulled into what was left of our old community, my stomach twisted. The fields were still there, the familiar patterns of the land, but everything else felt off. Our farmhouse, the one Kenji had built with his own hands, stood on its usual spot. But the paint was a different color. The windows looked new, unfamiliar curtains hung behind the glass. A different family lived there now. We saw children playing in the yard, strangers on our land. Our land, held in Taro's name, was gone. Just like that. It was a punch to the gut, a physical ache, all the pride Kenji had once felt, the decades of back-breaking labor, the dream he had cultivated for his children. It was erased. We stood there, on the side of the road, looking at our stolen life. No one had stopped to greet us. No one seemed to remember us. The people who now worked our fields, who lived in our home, they were just living their lives. But they were living it on our ruin. We didn't have a home to return to. Many Japanese Americans faced this. Our farms were gone, our businesses taken, our savings depleted. We were essentially refugees in our own country. For a time, we lived in a repurposed chicken coop on the edge of a sympathetic farmer's property. A man who had known Kenji before the war, who felt a quiet shame for what had happened. It was a humiliating existence, a stark contrast to the comfortable farmhouse we'd left. You have to understand the economic devastation. We hadn't just lost our farm, we'd lost capital, the accumulated wealth of a lifetime. The money we received for our land and equipment was a pittance, a fraction of its true value. That capital, that land, was our security, our livelihood, our legacy. It was what allowed us to buy seeds, maintain equipment, and support our family. Without it, we were starting from zero. But worse, we were starting with the added burden of prejudice. Taro, now 24, was a grown man, but his experience in the camp hadn't prepared him for the world outside. He was eager to work, to rebuild, but jobs were scarce for a Japanese American in California at that time. Many returning veterans faced challenges, but for us, there was an extra layer of suspicion and hostility. He tried applying at other farms, at packing houses, but often faced polite rejections or outright hostility. "No Japs here," one foreman had told him, flat out. He was a Nisei, a citizen, but it didn't matter. He was seen as the enemy. Kenji, with his weathered hands and stoic demeanor, felt the sting of this injustice deeply. He tried to find work as a farm laborer, a return to his youth. But even that was hard. He was older, and the work was often given to others. The thought of starting another farm from scratch was overwhelming. We had no land, no equipment, no capital. The dream of expanding the farm, of Taro taking over, it was shattered. Haruko, ever practical, found work sewing clothes for a local family, earning just enough to put some food on the table. Sakura, determined not to let her dreams die, found a way to finish high school, though her hopes of college in Sacramento seemed a distant, unattainable luxury now. Every penny went towards rent for the chicken coop, towards food. There was no saving, no future planning. It was just survival, day to day. But Kenji was Kenji. He couldn't sit still. He convinced a sympathetic farmer to let him use a small, unused patch of land. Maybe an acre, barely enough for a garden. With Taro, they began to plant. Not strawberries, not asparagus or tomatoes like before. Just simple, fast-growing vegetables, string beans, lettuce, radishes, whatever they could get seeds for. It was a humiliating step down, a return to the most basic subsistence farming. But it was something. It was work. It was dignity. It was also a lesson in economic hardship that went beyond simple inflation or depression. This was a targeted, systemic dispossession. The government had not only taken our liberty, but our wealth, our means of production, our ability to participate in the economy. This wasn't just about losing money. It was about having your entire economic foundation ripped out from under you, then being thrown back into a society that didn't want you. Looking back, the scars of those years ran deep. Not just the visible ones, but the invisible ones. The distrust of institutions, the constant worry about financial security, even when things got better. The knowledge that everything could be taken away in an instant by a simple order. It shaped us, individually and as a community. It taught us resilience, yes, but it also taught us that the American dream, for some, was built on shifting sand. The afternoon sun, pale and winter-thin, streamed through the window, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. I sat in my armchair, the one Haruko insisted we buy when we finally had enough to replace the rickety crates, a blanket draped over my knees. My hands, still calloused but now gnarled with age, cradled a photograph. It was faded, the colors muted by time, but I could still see it clearly. Our farm in Florin. The farmhouse, the long rows of strawberries, the asparagus shoots just breaking through the soil. Taro, a boy then, laughing as he picked berries. Sakura, a tiny thing, toddling through the fields. My farm, my legacy. Stolen, then slowly, painstakingly, reclaimed in spirit. Looking back, the financial ruin of the internment was so much more than just money. It was the forced sale of our land, the low prices that barely covered a fraction of its worth. The government offered some compensation later, with the Japanese-American Claims Act in 1948. But it was a pittance, really, like trying to put a bandage on a gaping wound. $38 million paid out, when the true losses were estimated at 10 times that, even in those old dollars. It wasn't about the cash, not really. It was about the destruction of a lifetime's work, the tearing apart of our community, the shattering of a promise. You build something, piece by piece, under the California sun, believing in the future, believing in a system that would protect you. And then, in a single moment, it's all gone. But we didn't break. We couldn't. How could we? We had to keep going. After Tule Lake, after the chicken coop, After the humiliation and the fear, we started again. Taro, bless his spirit, worked tirelessly, putting his strong back into whatever odd job he could find, even when the pay was insultingly low because of the color of his skin. Haruko, my steadfast Haruko, used her skilled hands for sewing for others, her fingers, once stained with farm soil, now aching from endless needles and thread. Sakura, despite everything, found her way to that college in Sacramento she'd always dreamed of, studying at night after long days of domestic work. She said she was doing it for all of us, to prove what we were capable of. She did. She became a teacher, a voice for justice. And me? I never owned a farm again, not like Florin. But I found peace in smaller plots, tending gardens for others, feeling the soil between my fingers, growing what I could. We learned to live with less, to appreciate simple things. A warm meal, a roof over our heads, the laughter of our children, then our grandchildren. We learned that true wealth wasn't in the land, but in the family that tilled it, in the spirit that persevered. For decades, the injustice of it all festered, a quiet ache in our community. We kept our heads down, worked hard, rebuilt what we could. But the memory, the shame, the profound betrayal, that stayed. And then, slowly, a new generation rose up. Our children who understood that silence wasn't always strength. They demanded to be heard. They spoke of civil rights, of constitutional wrongs. They fought for recognition. I remember sitting here, in this very chair, the radio on, listening to the news. It was 1988. I was an old man then, my hair white, my steps slow. They called it the Civil Liberties Act. President Reagan signed it. It acknowledged that the internment was a grave injustice. It offered a formal apology from the United States government. And yes, it offered $20,000 to each survivor. $20,000. It meant nothing, really, in the face of what we lost. It couldn't buy back the farm, couldn't heal the years of suffering, couldn't erase the memory of that bus ride, or the barbed wire. But the apology felt like a cool balm on a very old wound. It wasn't about the money, you see. It was about the truth, about America finally looking at its own shadow and saying, "We were wrong." My grandchildren, they didn't live through it. They saw the faded photographs, heard our stories, saw the quiet strength of their parents and grandparents. They learned about what happens when fear triumphs over freedom, when prejudice blinds a nation. And here's the thing, something I want you to understand today. What happened to us, the Japanese Americans, it wasn't just a historical event. It was a warning. It shows you how quickly civil liberties can erode when a society is gripped by panic. How easily economic ruin can be inflicted, not by market forces, but by government decree, driven by fear and prejudice. It shows you what happens when people are targeted because of who they are, where they came from, or how they look. It doesn't matter if it's during a war or in times of peace. The mechanisms of fear are always the same. We survived. We rebuilt. Our community, scattered and broken, found its way back, stronger and more vigilant than before. We learned that the land can be taken, money can be stolen, but the human spirit, the will to endure, to create, to love, that is something no one can ever truly intern. So, when you hear the whispers of division today, when you see people being scapegoated, when you hear calls to sacrifice liberty for security, remember our story. Remember Kenji Tanaka, the strawberry farmer from Florin, California. Remember the price of silence, the cost of fear. And remember the quiet strength it takes to keep planting seeds, even after the harvest has been stolen, because you know deep down that the future depends on it. You always are surprised what you're capable of,